I've clicked onto the global tropical overview for June the 25th, 2024. As is always the case in these videos, the subject's best to remain alone, and in making any decisions ahead of any tropical cyclones, look to your local weather office, local emergency management, and local tropical cyclone warning center. We have a couple areas of interest to monitor this week in the Atlantic. Two tropical waves. One is here in the eastern Caribbean, south of Puerto Rico, and it's going to be making some westward progression very fast this week in the Caribbean. And once it gets south of Cuba and Jamaica, it may have a chance to develop into a storm as we go throughout the rest of this week and into this weekend. We also have another tropical wave here offshore of Africa. It came offshore a couple days ago, sitting south of the Cabo Verde Islands right now, and this will be progressing west throughout this entire week in the tropical Atlantic. And once we get into the weekend time frame and into early next week, it will be approaching the Windward Islands, and we may have some potential for the system to develop as well once it gets there. We're going to first start off with this tropical wave in the Caribbean, and I'm going to first go into a closer up view so you can see the system better. Let me look where there we go. This is the better satellite loop for it. And you can see this more clearly here, more zoomed in this part of the world. And immediately you can tell that the wave is not doing all too well. You can see there's a lot of convection over it, which is a good sign for the system. But there's also a lot of outflow boundaries. You can see these white streaks spreading out from the convection. And these are outflow boundaries. And this is basically dry air getting into these thunderstorms as they go up and causing them to immediately collapse. And this is that cool rain-dried air that you see pushing away from those thunderstorms. And this is a sign that the system is struggling with some dry air, which you would come to expect. You can see apart from this wave, it's actually very dry in the Caribbean. Likely an effect of the strong trade winds moving through here. What these do is they cause low-level divergence, so the winds are diverging in the low levels, and that causes the air to dry out, especially in an area like where the wave is, and that causes systems to struggle. And that's why you usually don't see Caribbean development in this part of the Caribbean this time of year, and you'll often hear people refer to this area as a tropical cyclone graveyard. Another reason is that it's very difficult to close off westerly winds on the southern side of a low pressure system with these very strong easterly trades, and that's just some of the reasons why the system is not developing and why it's struggling for now. I say for now as the system is quickly moving off towards the west, and the system will be soon entering the western Caribbean, which is a bit more favorable for tropical development. One reason is that you can see in these low-level clouds is that the trade winds do slow down once you get into this area of the world, especially once you get into the western Caribbean near the Yucatan Peninsula. We really start to see those trade winds slow down. And when they slow down, you can sort of see an effect of this right here. The winds have to go somewhere, so they begin to just rise up. They start going up, and that causes a lot of rising air and a lot more thunderstorms to develop. And that can be, when you have a tropical wave involved, favorable, as that convection can feed the wave, and over time that can develop into an area full of pressure, and over time, if the environment is favorable, you can get a tropical cyclone from that. You can see that here in the GFS as we go in the next couple of days on the low-level vorticity plot. This yellow is showing you spin within the atmosphere. The wind barbs is low-level steering flow in the winds. And you can see it in the next couple of days reaching the western Caribbean. And you can see all the increased convection here highlighted in yellow, showing increased low pressure from the thunderstorms that are developing in here. Now, it's not just the trade winds that are also favoring this. We also have an upper trough digging in over the region. So you can see in this upper level wind plot from the GFS, we've got this big upper trough digging in to the Caribbean. And while it's possible that if the wave is here, it's bringing a little bit of shear to it, note that if we have a lot of convection blowing up here in the southern Caribbean, this is winds diverging away from it. And this is feeding, alongside the trades, that convection to blow up, and as a result you get more high pressure developing aloft. You can see this take place if we look at this plot here. This is showing you the upper trough in yellow, and the blue is upper level high pressure developing aloft of that convection. So as that convection is being fed by the trough and by the trade winds, we're getting more upper level high pressure developing. And over time, as this convection blows up, we start to get more of an area of high pressure that is able to fight this trough. And you can see that this trough really starts to thin out here in the Gulf of Mexico. So now the shear has exited the scene and the wave is still here. And now we have this upper level high pressure draped right on top of it. And this is a much more favorable low shear environment for the wave. And alongside that, because of that trough digging in, you have a lot of moisture available. You can see where the wave axis is compared to all the moisture, and there's just tons of deep tropical moisture up here by that trough. And this is a very favorable look, atmospherically at least, for the system. Now, I say atmospherically because one difficulty that the system will have to face is the land topography in this region. It's uncertain right now on exactly how far north or south the system is going to be once it gets into this part of the world, and that is very dependent, or it really dictates rather, what happens in terms of tropical development. If the system stays further north, we could get the system staying over water, and then with that upper level environment, you can get development taking place in fairly short order. But if the system stays further south, it could just easily bury itself within Central America. And you can sort of see this in the GFS low-level vorticity plot where we have, as we go into Friday, now the wave is about like this, and part of it is right embedded into the high terrain of Central America. Now, there is a little bit of an area of low pressure developing on the northern side of this. It's possible that this happens. The GFS is maybe hinting at maybe a northern lobe staying offshore. That could be your increased chance of tropical development. But if it completely buries itself within Central America, that could completely bring down odds of tropical development. And right now, it's completely uncertain on exactly what's going to happen. One reason being is that you can see in this earlier frame of this model run, the wave is like this. This is a fairly broad area of low pressure. And we also have it being entangled with the monsoon trough here. The monsoon trough is right about like this at this time. So we have a lot of convection blowing up here, and you can see there's a lot of spin, lots of low pressure within this area. So the question is, and this was sort of a question with Alberto, where does an area of low pressure form? Does it form here in the northern lobe like the GFS tries to show later in the run? Is it further down here in the southern Caribbean? And then does that just bury itself into Central America? And that's really the main question, and that's really the main hindrance right now for tropical development. And this is just going to be something to watch. It's hard to know exactly what's going to happen. Lots of models are showing the system struggling to develop, likely because of the land interaction in this area. Now, importantly, regardless of tropical development, the system will be bringing a lot of heavy rainfall to this area of the world, which frankly does not need this rain, as we just had 2 Central American gyres dump a ton of rainfall, especially in Central America. So hopefully we're not going to get a lot of rainfall from this, but it does not take much with the high terrain here. And that's going to happen either way, tropical cyclone or not. Now, once the system crosses the landmass, it's forecast to enter the Bay of Campeche. And at that point, there's more questions still of developments. There's some questions, does it hang back in Mexico over the high terrain, or is it over the Bay of Campeche? And that in itself could be, a chance of tropical development or redevelopment if it dissipates away in this part of the world. And there's just a ton of uncertainty on exactly what's going to happen with that. But point being, tropical development is possible, but impacts will likely stay the same here, regardless of tropical development. And we're not likely, as of this point, to see a strong system develop out of this. As remember, it is June, and we don't usually see strong systems this early in the season. Finally, for this system, you can see the National Hurricane Center tropical weather outlook. You can see where the tropical wave is right now, and they're giving the system about a 20% chance of developing, fairly low right now as it comes into the Western Caribbean, and you can see that development area right about where I highlighted there, north of Central America and going into the Bay of Campeche. And I'll have more updates on this as we go throughout the course of this week in the Atlantic. But of course, as I said at the beginning, we're not done with the Atlantic right now, as we have yet another tropical wave to watch. We have this one way out in the tropical Atlantic, a bit unusual to watch something way out there this time of year, but it can happen, and last year is certainly a good example of that. But the system is forecast to slowly track throughout the tropical Atlantic over the next few days. And as it comes west, particularly into the Lesser Antilles as we get into the weekend time frame and into early next week as we start the month of July, the system may have a chance to develop as the environment may be a little bit more favorable, a little more favorable than usual this time of year. You can see on the GFS that the GFS is very aggressive on the system already. In fact, the current run shows it becoming a tropical storm by 5 days, and then it has a tropical storm coming through the islands by early next week. Now, one thing that I will note with this, the GFS, and this is a very common bias with the GFS, it does have a tendency to go a bit aggressive here. And one thing that we're going to have to watch for to see if the GFS is actually right in this case, if it's catching on to something, is see how the wave does in the next, say, 2 to 3 days. You can see that the GFS in the next 2 to 3 days already has an area of low pressure developing within an intertropical convergence zone from the wave already by this time frame. And this is Friday, really Thursday night, and we already have an area of low pressure developed. If in real time by this time, on Friday morning, we do have an area of low pressure developing like this, then we could put more weight into the GFS actually saying a tropical storm could come through these islands this time next week. But as of right now, the GFS, I feel, is being a bit too aggressive right now. I'm leaning more towards the European model, which does show still a broad low. You can see on this run, it shows a broad low, but it struggles to develop, likely because of the more climatological factors that are usual for this time of year. Now, having said that, there is some reason to believe the GFS. This is the GFS horizontal wind anomaly. So the orange here is showing you anomalously westerly winds from normal. And you can see we have a large stretch of westerly winds relative to normal across the tropical Atlantic and the Caribbean. And what this would do is this could easily slow down the trade winds that are normally very strong in this part of the world this time of year. And this could decrease the wind shear. And also, I don't have it pulled up, but we'd have anomalous westerly winds aloft, and that's aligned with the trade winds. And that would result in a fairly low shear environment overall, at least in the tropical Atlantic. And you can see that here in the GFS, where we have this ballooning upper level high right over the tropical Atlantic. The system would be about right here, and it would be right on the forward flank of this ridge, would be right in the way of upper level divergence aided by this bridge. And that could potentially help with the system developing in the tropical Atlantic. One thing as well is that it will be interacting with the intertropical convergence zone. You can see this if you look at the big view of the tropical Atlantic. You can see this stretch of clouds and thunderstorms. This is that intertropical convergence zone. And usually this is a very good moisture source for tropical cyclones in this part of the world, especially in the early season. And as it interacts with that, it's going to be getting a lot of moisture. So you can see that on the GFS, it actually gets a really good moisture bubble surrounding itself. Now, one thing to watch for is if some of this dry air could potentially get entrained. You can see that GFS might be suggesting some of this getting entrained. You can see some blue or browns sort of wrapping around, and maybe some lighter greens as well wrapping into this low, and that could cause some issues for the storm, as it could decrease the thunderstorm activity around it. So while there are some difficulties, there are still some good things in its way for development like this upper high and maybe that moisture bubble. Now, the tropical development in the tropical Atlantic looks okay, but I will say, once it gets into the Caribbean, if it is not developed by that time, I don't think we're going to get any development from that system. And the same reason, it's really the same reason for this wave right here not developing. It's just these very strong trade winds. Even though we do have some slowed down trade winds on this run, you can see that as the system approaches the Caribbean, there's very strong trade winds still, and this would easily cause the system to struggle if it is not developed by this time. And I really think if it is going to develop, it's going to have its best opportunity east of the Windward Islands with that deep tropical moisture and that upper high. Now, importantly, and this is a similar case with a tropical wave in the Caribbean right now, tropical storm or not, this system is likely going to still bring some strong gusty winds like the wave just did in the Caribbean. Main reason being is that when you have a tropical wave here, you typically have a very strong area of high pressure up north, so you get a pressure gradient on the north side. So even if it's not a tropical storm, even if it's just a tropical wave, you can get a lot of strong winds on the north side of this. And alongside that, these usually do have a lot of rainfall with them, as you can see with this tropical wave that just moved through. And that will likely be the impact tropical storm or tropical wave when it does come through sometime next week. But it's something to watch, and it's just a reminder that we're getting more close to the heart of hurricane season as we are now entering the time frame of July. This would be July 1st on this run. And it's important to remember that this hurricane season is forecast to be fairly active, and we may have more systems like this. And if storms come like this wave are in August and September, when the environment is more climatologically favored, then we could have more big issues. So it's just a reminder that we're within that hurricane season time frame. But there is no current area of interest from the National Hurricane Center. I imagine they're waiting for further guidance, as the European is not as keen on it. You can see by 7 days, it's still a tropical wave on this run, not a tropical storm at all. And some more runs or frames came in. You can see still a tropical wave on this run. And this would just be bringing a lot of gusty winds and heavy rainfall to the region, even not being a tropical storm. That's all that I've got for today. There's no tropical development likely elsewhere in the world. It's fairly quiet apart from the Atlantic. And I'll have more videos on both of these systems as they progress west throughout this week. That's all that I've got for now. Thanks for watching.